Welcome to the CHCI 2022 Health Summit. It's an important topic we're discussing here today, as I'm sure you all know. These last few years have made today's Health Summit particularly important. Yeah. The global pandemic has exposed the weaknesses in our healthcare system and shined a bright light on the healthcare disparities that exist. As we heard during yesterday's Education and Economic Empowerment Summit, I hope some of you were able to join us, even with our community's continued educational, professional, and financial progress, Latinos still face higher rates of unemployment, of food and housing insecurity, of inadequate or unreliable infrastructure and resources, and more when compared to white families, all of which was exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic. Latinos also face higher rates of chronic diseases such as cardiovascular disease, cancer, liver disease, diabetes, and Alzheimer's, which increase the risk of other complications and are compounded by a lack of diagnosis, access to treatments, and social determinants of health. But we are now more aware of these challenges than ever before, and there are more of us and our allies working to address them, to close gaps, and to improve our community's health and well-being. Today, we're going to have some rich discussions and some insightful conversation about how health, in all its forms, has impacted the nation and the Latino community, and what we can do to ensure a healthier future for all of us. We'll hear from members of Congress, from senior administration officials, from corporate executives, healthcare advocates, thought leaders, and health experts about the state of Latina health, about diversity in clinical trials, about mental health, and how we produce solutions for these and other health challenges we all face. I want to express my sincere thanks to our Health Summit host, Eli Lilly and Company, and to all of our partners whose support has helped make this summit possible. And thank each of you for being here with us today. We hope you enjoy the conversations. Now, don't forget to engage with us on social media throughout the day using the hashtag CHCI Summit. And now we're going to move on to start our day with our opening plenary. And for those of you who don't know, we are recording this plenary. We'll be recording all of our sessions today, and we'll make them available online in a few days, in about a week, so that folks who weren't able to join us, folks who were not located in Washington, D.C., can also benefit from these conversations. So now I'm delighted to kick off our opening plenary, A Better Environment for Better Health. On behalf of CHCI, I would like to thank the Natural Resources Defense Council and the Environmental Defense Fund for their generous support of this session. You know, according to a recent survey, over 70% of Latinos have personally experienced the impact of climate change. Beyond that, and perhaps because of it, our community faces higher rates of asthma, of malnutrition, and even mental unwellness. This session is going to bring together health experts, policymakers, and stakeholders to discuss the intersection of health and climate change and how creating a better environment will improve health outcomes in Latino communities and the nation. And now it's my honor to introduce the chair for this panel, who also happens to be the chair of CHCI. Congresswoman Nanette Diaz-Barragan was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives in November 2016, becoming the first Latina ever to represent California's 44th Congressional District. She has said that her humble beginnings shaped her interest in issues that matter locally: environmental and health justice, immigration reform, strengthening the economy, and affordable and accessible education. The Congresswoman is a member of the Progressive Caucus. She serves on the House Committee on Homeland Security, where she chairs the Subcommittee on Border Security, Facilitation, and Operations, and serves on the House Committee on Energy and Commerce. In addition to chairing CHCI, she is the vice chair of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus. So please welcome Congresswoman and Chairwoman Nanette Diaz-Barragan.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I want to thank you all for being here. Thank you to our panelists for not only being here and being on this panel, but for everything you do day in and day out for the environment and for our communities and the health of our communities. And when I read today the description about the intersection, for me, it's not just an intersection, it's like the same thing. And I represent a district in South Los Angeles that includes the port, where you have a lot of air pollution. Whether it's pollution coming from ships, whether it's pollution coming from truck traffic, whether it's the refinery in the backyard, there is a lot of air pollution, and people are getting asthma and cancer at higher rates. And who's living in these communities? Latinos. Latinos are on the front lines, and we know they're disproportionately impacted. And what was really fascinating for me when I was running for Congress, I went into Wilmington, California, which is often a forgotten city that gets the brunt of it, and it's a majority Latino. I went into the community to take photos with the oil drilling refineries, the oil drilling and the refineries behind me, and it was really amazing at how fast a security officer came out. I was in a public street, and he's like, "What are you doing here?" I said, "I'm taking photos." He goes, "It's a safety issue," and tried to intimidate me into not taking pictures. And I thought to myself, if my mom were the person out here, she would be intimidated. She would say, "You know what? We're immigrants. We don't cause trouble, and if someone tells us not to do something, we're not going to do it." And so for me, this is about standing up for our community, standing up for our health, standing up for the environment, and the two go hand in hand. And so it's one of the reasons it's one of my top priorities. And when I ran for city council, I fought an oil company that wanted to drill into our neighborhoods and then out into the Santa Monica Bay. And one of the really important things about climate change and the environment is the way we talk about it in our Latino communities. If you go and you talk about climate change and you just say climate change, people aren't really as invested as when you talk about it as a public health crisis. And you say, do you care about your children who are getting asthma and cancer? When you start talking about it as a public health crisis, it's quite remarkable to see the change of parents and folks on the ground. And I'm talking about the folks I talk to in Spanish. And then they understand, and then it's more relatable to them. And so I just want to continue to just encourage everybody and thank everybody for helping on the messaging. Sometimes the way we deliver the message is half the battle. And for me, sitting on the Energy and Commerce Committee and the Healthcare Subcommittee is all about protecting our communities and the health of our communities. And so it made sense when I got on the committee that I was on the Healthcare Subcommittee and on the Environment Subcommittee. And then I had a whole conversation, actually, with the Energy and Commerce staff saying, wait a minute, we thought you wanted to work on the environment. How come you're trying to get on the Healthcare Subcommittee? I said, because the environment, climate, that is public health. And the two go hand in hand. And we see kids who are getting too sick because of asthma or cancer or respiratory illnesses. They're too sick to go to school. And the doctors, they pile up these asthma inhalers in Wilmington because they're expecting it. And so anyhow, I probably don't have to, I'm probably preaching to the choir here and to this group about the importance of addressing climate, air pollution, and the intersection it has on public health, and the intersection it has in just the cycle of poverty. Because if you're too sick to go to school, you're missing school, and you're not doing well, and then we, in my district, have really lower rates of high school graduation and people who are going to college, and I think there's a intersection across the board. And so with that, I just wanted to be here to thank you all for the work you do, and looking forward to hearing the panel. I'll have to watch the recorded remarks because I have a markup at 10 a.m. that I have to run to in Energy and Commerce. But thank you all for your interest, and let's keep up the fight. Even though we still haven't been able to get some of the bigger provisions of climate across the finish line, we can't give up, and we have to keep fighting. And even though we got some in the infrastructure bill, that's a very small step, and we got to keep going. So thank you all. Have a great session.
Thank you so much, Madam Chairwoman, for those remarks, and most importantly, for being a steadfast advocate on this really critical issue and on so many issues, and for your leadership of CHCI and for the Latino community in the halls of Congress. Up next, we're fortunate to have keynote remarks today from a very special guest. Secretary Javier Becerra served 12 terms as a member of the U.S. House of Representatives. And during his tenure, he was the first Latino to serve as a member of the Committee on Ways and Means, as chairman of his party's caucus, as the ranking member of the Ways and Means Subcommittee on Social Security, and ranking member on the Subcommittee on Health. And he is a former chairman of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus Institute. Throughout his career, the Secretary has made it his priority to ensure that Americans have access to the affordable health care they need to survive and, in fact, to thrive. And so now, please turn your attention to the video screen for the 25th Secretary of the Department of Health and Human Services, the Honorable Secretary Javier Becerra.
Thank you, Marco and Chairwoman Diaz-Barragán, for allowing me to participate once again in CHCI activities. Feels like old times. And to everyone at the Congressional Hispanic Caucus Institute, thank you for holding such an important conversation. Throughout its history, the Congressional Hispanic Caucus has been at the forefront of nurturing the Latino leaders of tomorrow and championing the issues that affect Latino families nationwide. Education, economic empowerment, immigration, and today, the environment and health equity. Thank you for leading the conversation. America is a country that is rich in natural resources in terms of our environment, our people, our diversity. These resources make America this shining city on a hill, and at the same time, the economic engine that drives the world. Yet more than 40% of Americans, over 137 million people, are breathing unhealthy air. And across our country, people are seeing their homes flood, their earthly possessions burn, and their local waterways dry up. In my home state of California, we've lost homes, loved ones, and whole towns to ever-worsening wildfires. And a lot of this we can attribute to climate change. What's more, the burden of living in an unhealthy environment is not shared equally. According to the American Lung Association's State of the Air study, people of color are 3.5 times more likely than their white peers to live in a county with unhealthy levels of particle pollution or ozone. 1 of 2 Latinos lives in a county with poor air quality. Over 1.8 million Latinos live within a half-mile radius of oil and gas development, and nearly 6 million Latinos are drinking water from a tap that violates federal standards. Kids are growing up playing soccer next to highways, breathing in exhaust from dirty trucks and cars. Moms and dads have to scrape together money they don't have for asthma medication. We're talking about communities like the ones in East Los Angeles that I used to represent in Congress. We're talking about too many Americans who don't have clean air to breathe or water to drink because they can't afford it. That's unacceptable. As Attorney General of California, I created the Bureau of Environmental Justice because I felt that it was important for the California Department of Justice to have a legal arm protecting low-income and disadvantaged communities that experience environmental degradation first and worst. And now, as Secretary of Health and Human Services, I've established the Office of Climate Change and Health Equity to address the impact of climate change on the health of the American people, especially the most vulnerable. The office serves as the connective tissue that coordinates all the climate and health actions that our HHS agencies are taking, from the CDC to NIH and everywhere in between. Throughout our agencies, we have other initiatives to support our efforts to reduce health threats from climate change and to assist our communities, such as the National Institute of Health's Climate Change and Health Initiative Strategic Framework and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention's Climate and Health Program. In all, we are proud to be the first administration that has taken an all-of-government approach to address the health inequities from climate change across the board. In so many different ways, when we protect our environment, we're not just doing a good service to Mother Earth, but to the health of people who must endure under trying environmental conditions. It is fitting that we are taking on this challenge at HHS and in the Biden administration, because in so many ways, the best environmentalists are the people like my parents, Manuel and Maria, who had little choice about where their children would play or recreate. Families who have no option but to be frugal and conserve, whether on gasoline or electricity, whether on healthcare or vacations. These families often prove to be our best stewards of Mother Earth. And so, by all right, we should think of them always as we plan our strategies to heal our planet and address climate change. America's hardest working families should, for once, be the ones we think of first and most as we meet our obligations as leaders. Thank you to CHCI for giving voice to Manuel and Maria and everyone else, those families of America who depend on us to tackle the challenges of keeping our nation healthy and strong.
Thank you, Secretary Becerra, for your insights and your steadfast efforts to create a better environment for better health for all Latinos and everyone in the nation. And now that the stage has been set, let's begin this important conversation. To facilitate this panel, we're delighted to have Felix Benitez as our moderator for this session. Felipe has more than 20 years of experience designing and implementing strategic communication and outreach strategies for advocacy campaigns worldwide, from protecting the fundamental rights of indigenous groups in the Amazon, to fighting climate change, to helping protect the rights of immigrants in the United States. He's played a leadership role at organizations like United Way Worldwide, Fenton Communications, and Ogilvy Public Relations, and now is the founder and executive director of Corazon Latino, a national organization that seeks to generate social, environmental, and conservation initiatives that foster natural resource stewardship. It's my pleasure to now turn the session over to our moderator, Felix Benitez.
Thank you very much, Marco. So it's exciting to see leadership like Congresswoman Barragan, like Secretary Becerra, seeing people that look like us, that understand us, and that act and advocate on behalf of our communities. And as I will always say it, voting matters. Civic engagement matters. So that's important because that's the direct result of our community participating. So with no further ado, I want to get started on this. I'm thrilled, I'm honored, I'm excited. It's so great to see you in person, at least with bumps and elbow bumps, but to finally get together. We're not over, the pandemic is not over, but we're getting there. And it's thanks to the leadership of leaders like Congresswoman Barragan and Secretary Becerra, and all of us, to be honest, that we have really brought, united, and mobilized our communities to get through this. Because at the end of the day, we talk about 70% of Latinos having suffered the consequences of climate change. Well, COVID exacerbated that, and we realize how bad it is for our communities. We are also witnessing how our Madre Tierra is screaming at us. Look what's happening right now in New Mexico. Unprecedented fires. We just started yet another record-setting hurricane season in the Caribbean. Droughts, extreme weather, it's not something that happens every 5 years or every 10 years, happening every year. And the reality is that if we don't take care of Mother Earth, it's for our own peril. We're going to suffer the consequences. I'm Felix Benitez, I'm the Executive Director of Corazon Latino, and we, as Corazon Latino, believe in one premise, which is if we take good care of our Madre Tierra is gonna take care of us. That's simple. If we attack it, if we destroy it, she's gonna pass us the bill. It's gonna be bad for us. So, but we do believe in that reciprocity. We believe that Earth, human, and our society's well-being everything is correlated. So that's what we do. But that's enough about me. We have an amazing panel. I'm really thrilled to have these amazing ladies joining me on stage. And rather than me trying to read a blurb that might not mean a lot, I want them to introduce themselves. So let's start with Shawna on my left.
Hello, everyone. I'm so honored to be here. My name is Shawna Edwards. I'm the Director of Conservation Programs for Hispanic Access Foundation. We are a national nonprofit that works to build Latino leaders and bring them the resources and the access and the partnerships that they need to create a healthy environment for everyone and an equitable United States. And I'm so pleased to be here because this is the conversation that we need to be happening. If it's felt like the world has kind of been unraveling in the past few years, that just means that it's an opportunity to put it back together in new and better ways. And talking about the crux of health in our natural environment is how we will get at the heart of these issues and to the solutions that we need to implement. So thank you.
Thank you, Shawna. And then Angela Manos. I like Angela, it's more Latina.
Buenos días a todos. Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here. Angela Manson, I'm the National Outreach Director at the Natural Resources Defense Council, or NRDC. And ours is a 50-year young organization that was founded by law students and professors, attorneys, who really were at the forefront of the environmental movement back in the early 70s. And our mission is really simple. You know, we aim to safeguard people, plants, and animals, and all the systems in which life depends. And we do this through the work of attorneys, policy advocates, communications professionals, and through partnerships, of course, such as with CHCI and many others. I'm really excited to be here. This is a timely conversation, as Shawna had mentioned, and being able to support this event along with our partners, EDF. I'm really looking forward to hearing your questions and learning from this incredible panel that we have here today. So thank you so much for holding this and for having me be a part of it.
Thank you, Angela. And Carolina?
Last but not least, good morning, everyone. My name is Carolina Pena. I'm Bolivian, living here in Washington, D.C. since 2001. I represent the Environmental Defense Fund, an organization that finds solutions that works. And within this initiative that I leading, which is Ecomadres, Ecomadres is an initiative that is part of Moms Cleaner Force, which is more than 1 million mothers, parents, caregivers, aunts like me, working for finding solutions about the greatest challenge that we have in the 21st century, which is climate change. And when I see this session, I have been always in panels that always scientists or policymakers are, and seeing here so many young generations and colleagues from the media, which is important because we needed to address this message about climate change that is something that is tangible. It's not an oak. It's not something that is going to happen in decades far. It's happening currently. So I'm very excited about these panels and looking forward to further discussion. So thank you.
Thank you, Carolina. And before I forget, and before Dennis and Gabe scold me, we are going to have a question and answer session at the end. So save your questions for the last 10 minutes. So also, hashtag CHCI Summit. Make sure that you share the love in social media. But let's get started. Angela, you're my first victim. Let's talk. Where are we? I mean, we know it's bad. We know there's a lot to be done, but there's also opportunities. Tell us about where are we, specifically from a global perspective. I know that we know that the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change, I did my homework. The UN just released yet another very alarming, but also good call to action for nations. Would you mind telling us a little bit, where are we?
Okay, sure. So as you mentioned, the IPCC, they released their report in February of this year, I believe. And it validated, confirmed, I guess, what so many of us already knew, the challenge of climate change. It is accelerating. The impacts are being felt much more immediately, much more widespread. And also the fact that it's disproportionately affecting low-income communities, communities of color. When you're looking at it, taking a step back, the global south is often referred to. So confirming what we have always suspected and we've been saying for a long time. And what it also brought to bear was the fact that, all the other systems that are going to be impacted by this, right? We're talking about health systems and the fact that those who are most impacted tend to, of course, as I just said, tend to be poor, but also tend to lack access to health care, are suffering disproportionately asthma, upper respiratory diseases, all sorts of other factors, right? They're working in environments that are getting hotter. So workers who are, day laborers, farmers, forestry, any of that, anybody who's working outside, they're feeling those effects. How are we trying to help them adapt to this, new situation? But there were some important takeaways, that the rising financial costs and the economic-wide risks of compounding, as I said, are undeniable. And, it isn't just about the workers not being able to work, but it's also the businesses not being able to do their business, right? It's increasing your costs overall. Also, the linkages between healthcare, the financial cost, right, and how that increases. And if you think of it as a circle, if you're, poor, you're getting sick, you can't go to work, you don't make money, you cannot get care, you cannot find housing, that takes you away from a place where it's polluted. So, it's a terrible spiral, downward spiral, but it's happening. And we haven't been thinking or talking about it that way. As the Congresswoman said, it is a public health issue that is merely being compounded by all the other disadvantages that are going on. It's the core of this is reducing climate damage. It is getting off of burning coal. It is getting off of fossil fuels. That is the key to this. There is nothing else around us. We have to get to that place. And there are adaptation measures that we can take, but the truth of it is that there are a lot of barriers to this. They're expensive adaptation measures. So we really need to make a commitment to fund these measures in order to be able to protect health and protect all the other systems that people are dependent on.
Thank you, Angela. Shawna, we'd love for you to talk a little bit about environmental justice, how it relates, what Angela framed really nicely. How does it relate, how does it land with our communities? What are you seeing from the perspective of your work and Hispanic Access Foundation? I'm gonna go with you, Carolina, afterwards about the clean air, but let's start with Shawna.
Yeah, we've heard some really striking statistics already from our previous speakers. And I want to add some news that just came out that in the next 30 years, 1 in 4 Latinos will be living in a county that is at high risk for wildfires. For Native Americans, that number is almost 1 in 2. And of course, when you're talking about communities of color, and especially Latinos, they have less access to healthcare for the damage that smoke brings to your respiratory system. Fewer rates of home insurance to be able to bounce back and find housing again and rebuild your life after a disaster. And we know every year the hurricanes are getting worse. And I know we've always heard that communities of color are affected first and worst, but I want to add that they're also affected last. Because when the floodwaters recede, you still have mold in your home that is causing your family to be breathing in toxic air. And we see that near oil and gas wells, as we've heard, near truck routes, warehouses, highways. All of it comes down to worse health for our families, worse education, and lower economic rates, as we've heard that businesses can be impacted. And that is the heart of environmental justice, is the polluted air that is causing our families to suffer and live worse lives. And so the Biden administration is starting to recognize this problem and invest in what are called these environmental justice communities, those that are suffering the worst impacts.
And we'll get into that a little bit, but let me go to Carolina. And I mean, we heard about how it's affecting directly our kids. And that's the work that you do. You mobilize parents, you mobilize moms, tios, tias, abuelitos, everybody to defend our communities. A little bit what both Secretary Becerra and Congresswoman Barragan were mentioning, our families are coming. But tell us a little bit about that and how Ecomadres is, what is seeing on the ground, what is happening right now, just to complement what was just presented.
I want to take opportunity of this space that I have and just to share what we do at Ecomadres. So Ecomadres is that space that we provide to parents and people that wanted to take actions in their own spaces, that they see that there is pollution, there is effects in their health. And especially as Latinos, we care about our families. We, as Latinos, we enjoy being outdoors. And most of the agricultural people are Latinos, 3 or 4 are in the field, and they are the ones that are experiencing the extreme heat waves that are happening due to climate change, and also in construction. So the role that we as Latino plays is great, not just in the workforce, but as Felipe told us, as Moms Cleaner Force, we focus on families. We focus because a mother is the one that see directly day by day when the kid is sick. And being part of these more than million parents around the country, we have seen in our own organizers that we have that their kids are not allowed to go outside because they are looking on the reports that the air is not safe to go. And especially Latinos are living or are working in places that are unhealthy, as the secretary was mentioning. So as that, we don't want it to be like con los brazos cruzados, no? So we needed to take action. So that's what our community started with education, to make the connection in a way that people understand, and we provide the resources. So that's what I said, that I want to take this opportunity to tell you that this is an initiative that is available for us, for Latinos, and we are connecting with others, like Corazon Latino. That's what we, with Felipe, we always share resources, because we wanted to make available resources that are in our language. Because here in the US, sometimes this information is available only in English, and it's not in Spanish. And if it's available in Spanish, it's not accordingly in the context that we as Latinos could understand and take action. So we also organize cafecitos. So it's a platform that colleagues like me and some of that I joining me in this audience organize to talk about it, and to talk, because this type of conversation has to start in the house, because that's where we see the impacts on the health of our own families. And we empowered our members to talk with elected officials. And that's what we were so excited that this year, in recent audiences that were requested by the environmental, the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, to roll out some of the policies that are going to improve our air. Most of the participants were from Moms Cleaner Force and Ecomadres, because we wanted to share with our elected officials why this is important for us. And as Latinos, some of them that are here in the US are coming because Latin America has been suffering because of that. So that's what is the climate migrants that we are having here in the US. So there is so many issues that are connected, and for Latinos, this is going to our core, and that's what I am very excited to be part of Ecomadres and Moms Cleaner Force, because we wanted to provide information so that people will be able to understand the seriousness, and that they are able to connect with their elected officials, so infrastructures and also policies could be formulated or could be adapted, so improve the conditions of our communities.
And trust me, there's not more powerful force than mamas and mothers fighting for our Mother Earth. And if you have not, mamas, tías, tíos, papás, everybody, by the way. Yeah, I'm part of it too. Angela, we'd love to hear what's happening. What can be done at the federal, at a state level? We know it's bad. There's no sugarcoating it. Sure. But I think there's a lot of things, and Shawna spoke a little bit about what the current administration is doing, but what else can be done? How, and most important, what can we all do to get us to a solution?
Well, some of it is already happening, right? So Congresswoman Barragan mentioned the infrastructure legislation that Congress passed, and it's a start. It is not a climate bill. That is something that we make very clear. It provides funding for infrastructure, certainly, water, roads, and that kind of thing. And it does have some provisions there wanting to drive certain climate or priorities. However, what we need is the larger bill to really go the distance. It has all the provisions. It certainly has a lot of priorities in that bill that we care about. Lead service line replacements. As was mentioned by Secretary Becerra, the vast number of homes across this country are served still by lead service lines. Okay. So, things like what we saw in Flint several years ago, which our organization was heavily involved in, that's just the tip of the iceberg. Mm-hmm. This is happening and is going to happen in communities across the country if we do not move right now to invest and, you know, get these lead service lines out of the ground and out of our homes. And there's a workforce that's ready to do it, and there are opportunities to train folks who live in our communities, bring those jobs to our communities, and do this work. And, you know, you get the twofer, right? You get good, you know, better water, and you get good jobs out of this, right? But we're also looking at, you know, capping oil and gas wells that have been abandoned across this country. You know, that's the way, as you mentioned, you know, people who are living near these things and are having to breathe in this air, this polluted air. These are things that we can help stop. And I think this legislation that we're working on and we're going to see happen is going to be able to bring those resources in. And as Shannon mentioned, the Justice 40, the fact that resources are going to be, you know, directed towards these, you know, communities that have been impacted over and over and over again. This is why it's so much more important that we get it done. But what you can do, right? So there's funding already sitting at states. The thing is that they have to allocate, they've got to define how these funds are going to be directed, that kind of thing. That is where folks can get involved, because if we don't, what you see happen is that the funding goes to the same place it always goes, year after year after year. And then you're wondering, well, why is this problem not solved? It's like, well, the money came, but it got distributed to the places where people spoke up, made a fuss, if you will, you know, got into good trouble.
Good trouble.
Right, exactly, good trouble. But they demanded, right? They said, listen, we have a need here in this community. We will work with you. Let's get these resources into the places where we know there is serious need. So people can certainly, you know, continue to get involved that way, not just at the federal level, but also at the state and local level.
Yeah, change happens from a municipal, state, and federal level,
Right.
and we have to keep going.
We see it, you know, there's a reality here. We don't want to simply think that everything is going to happen at the federal level and it's done.
Because it's not.
A lot of this happens at the state and the local level. There are ways that folks can help, you know, local and state leaders understand how you do clean energy investments. You know, there are a number of different models out there, entities that have been resourcing cities to help them bring those kinds of solutions, climate solutions, to the people. So there's certainly resources out there that folks can talk up and see, try to see that they get implemented.
And Carolina, there's a particular local action that I love that Moms Cleaners has been very engaged, which is the electric school buses. That's such a local solution that has a huge impact. So can you might tell us a little bit about those type of that kind of approach and what you have done in that space?
No, it is exciting. Actually, 2 weeks ago, we were in Montgomery because we were visiting this school, and we were able to see the bus. And it's not just the bus that represent where carry the kids every single day, and we see on the street. The bus represents that every day a kid running in this bus in a diesel, which is right now what is happening, is inhaling air that is polluted, and it's every single day. And it's not just the kid, because as I said, like I was in this school in Montgomery, I was able to talk with the driver, which happened to be a Latina, and she was telling me, like, it's not that the kids, when they were running, it's like, am I coming on the electric bus? Because they notice a change. And it's not just on the air that they breathe, but they also notice on the noise, because it's also not impacting their ears. And it's not just on the kids, but also in the community, because the bus goes through the neighborhood, and they see that there is not that noise. So our initiative and Moms Cleaners Force has been advocating for this type of changes, because when we were saying about air pollution covers a lot of topics, and one of them is the transportation, and the transportation here in the United States is the biggest polluter. So that's why there is a rule actually that just finished the comments to submit by the public on the 16th of May, which it was to regulate the heavy trucks and buses on improving the contamination that is happening. And that's what, thank you, Felipe, for pointing it out. That's one of the initiatives that Ecomadres is heavily impacted. And when I said impacted, is that we wanted that every state should have access to this. But there is the problem, because everyone would like to have that. But the problem is that it is 3 more times costly, the electric bus versus the diesel. So recently, yesterday, I think, it was EPA launched a rebate program, and that's something that we are going to be providing information to our communities nationwide, so they will be having access to that, and how to submit their application in order to get access to these grants. So they wanna be enabled, a school, to apply for those grants, so they wanna be able to have these electric buses as part of their transportation for the kids that are going every day to classes. So because every parent would like that their kids are going to be in a vehicle that is healthy, and we know that. And even when we go to charge a gas station, we inhale already the smell of the diesel, so we know. And this one is every single day that every kid goes. So that's why we're very excited that we promote these electric buses around the country.
Props, it's really exciting. It's great technology. There's jobs for our community, as Angela was mentioning. It's benefiting our kids, and it's actually, they're really cool also.
Yeah.
So,
And neighbors.
Right.
Yeah, and neighbors.
And that's an important provision also that we're looking at in terms of electrifying, the grid,
Exactly.
bringing the public transit, which is, as you mentioned, is a big
huge
polluter.
impact.
Imagine going through our neighborhoods. I'm a bus rider. I live here in DC and stuff like that. It's like, imagine being able to go through and it's like, and you don't have to smell the bus coming.
Just worry about the kids now.
Exactly. Exactly.
Shawna, I mean, we're talking about the big elephant in the room. It's our dependency on big oil.
Yes.
What can we do? Anything we can do. What is the technology? How do we hold polluters accountable?
Well, we need a whole economic transformation. Public transit needs to be a huge part of that because cars are such a big part of our American life, but they're also less accessible to Black and Latino communities who are more reliant on public transit. And public transit is something that improves your health as well. It lets you get to know your neighbors, it builds community. It's one of those solutions that hits a lot of different benefits in one. And we need that, but also for energy generation. So I know often when you think of climate change, you think of solar and wind power. Unfortunately, Latinos only make up something like 2% of clean energy executives. And that's a huge opportunity because when you hire Latinos and you train them up to positions, that means that you're going to be able to reach new neighborhoods with things like solar power. Because right now, unfortunately, even accounting for homeownership, Latinos are less likely to be able to have access to solar panels. Every transformation can and should be a jobs program, and it needs to include our communities because otherwise it's a transition that leaves our communities behind. And it's a transformation just for white communities, just for high-income communities. And I also want to talk about transformation with regards to nature, because one thing that our research has found is that every 30 seconds, a football field-sized area of greenery is paved over in this country. And where our nature is being lost is, as you might expect, in Latino communities, Black communities, Asian communities, Native American communities. So the biodiversity crisis, which we haven't yet discussed, is the same thing as the nature loss crisis, is the same thing as the climate crisis, because when we bring nature back to our communities, that's parks that our kids have to play in. That's somewhere that you can go for a jog or just take a stroll, and all that comes back to health, to our immune systems and our hearts and our lungs and our ability to withstand things like this respiratory pandemic. So we need solutions in all aspects of life, and we need it to include the most vulnerable and disenfranchised communities.
Thank you for bringing nature, and thank you for bringing that point. America's Forest calls it tree equity, which is really how the correlation between tree canopy and the health of the community. And you see it in, like in LA, in certain areas where the most affluent communities, we have higher health standards or less health troubles are those who have access to those green spaces. And I want to give a quick plug to Helen Cortez. Helen Cortez, raise your hand. She works for the Forest Service, and she is really devoted on making sure that tree equity exists within our communities. And such an important topic. So I know we have now time for Q&A. Denise, is this sure? Yeah, so if there's any burning questions, comments,
No burning.
statements.
No burning, no burning.
Okay, cooling one. Yes, sir.
Oh, can I send? Thank
Your
you
name,
guys. Sure.
where you come from, and if it's going to anybody, direct to anybody here.
Sure. Pablo Salguero here from Morgan Stanley in New York City. Thank you for being here. This is such an important topic, necessary topic to speak about. You know, Carolina, I think to your point, transportation is one of the biggest reasons, polluters, like for climate change, for, you know, methane gas, and I'm talking about CO2 gas. And we certainly need to electrify our grids, or improve our grids, update our grid, and transition from carbon fossil fuels to, you know, the electric cars and all that. But this is something that is going to take a while, right? The fossil fuel industry is fighting back hard, and it's not something that can be done overnight. You know, the buses is a big concern. I would argue that even though that is the long-term plan to, you know, get electric buses on the road and running, in the interim, I think a more practical solution would be to get those Cadillac converters in all of these buses fixed, because that's what captures a lot of the toxic fumes, the toxic pollutants in a lot of these cars. And, you know, is it just an interim practical thing that can save a ton of kids' lives, a ton of, you know, asthma? I'm from Guatemala. I lived where none of those cars had Cadillac converters. You see the smog on every car, just like, you know, and I breathed that in. And when I came here, my asthma was gone. And I realized that that was because it was, you know, I was not in an environment where cars were, like, people cared about cars, right? So I think improving those things, like just looking for things that can really, like, make an impact, because that's what I care about. Like, what can we do to make an impact right now, right? Cadillac converters being one, checking the air on tires, another. You know, cars, I think we all drive cars, and we forget that, you know, every time, you know, how often our tires deflate, and this burns a lot of fuel, you know. And so looking for these practical things at the federal government, at the local level, at the state level, I think it's incredibly important. And so to your point, like, we absolutely need to transition to an all-electric, you know, battery, lithium-ion technology, and whatever technology comes after, but we need to look for practical interim solutions. And I think those two things are just simple steps that we can take. Well, not simple, but, you know, more practical steps that we can take in order to improve our conditions right now. Thank you.
Let me respond really quickly, although it's not my role, but I will. I think, yes, there's practical small solutions that we can take, which is important, but the technology is there. We don't have to wait for when solar panels are going to be cheaper than putting a combustion oil, a regular combustion engine in your vehicle. It's cheaper. The finance is there. It's good business. What we're just missing is the political will. Mm-hmm. And that, my friends, it's a renewable resource too. And we change it by voting, by being active. So, I mean, I appreciate, and I think everything counts. I mean, there's every action counts, but we need to be bold. There's no time to wait. There's no time for Band-Aid solutions. We have the opportunity. We have the moral obligation to do it, because our children, our grandchildren are the ones that are suffering and will be suffering. And they're gonna come back and look at us and say, hey, when you have the time, when you had the technology and the money, what did you do? You gave up, you check your tires, which I'm not saying, or you actually took bold action. And this is the time to do it. There's no time to spare. So I welcome, and I think it's important to take those immediate actionable items, but we need to be very bold. And sorry, but to take a little bit, I want to see if there's any other.
No, I would just say, I appreciate that view and all, but I think you would also have to agree. The auto industry is already recognizing that we can't continue as we are. The announcements that many of them have made that they're going to be putting out more electric vehicles in their fleets. Some of them are going to be converting altogether to that. They see what's coming, and they're preparing for it. I think the cost of some of the used electric vehicles, the technology has improved tremendously over the years, but the cost of used electric vehicles have gone down sufficiently. And when we get the climate bill passed and the tax incentives in there that are be available for families or moderate income families to be able to upgrade their vehicles. I hear what you're saying, but it doesn't solve the problem of continuing to mine for oil and gas and burning that fuel. And so, I see where you're coming from. It's like, yes, it makes absolute sense. It's very practical. But at the other end, we're still continuing the other practices that are putting the planet in peril.
Let me extend an olive branch there. I don't mean to say we should stop what we're doing.
Yeah.
I think this absolutely needs to continue. I just think that it should be done in tandem with other practices.
Absolutely.
At the same time, to your point, there is no time to waste.
Right.
We should be electrifying every aspect of our lives, and that needs to keep going. But we need to move quickly, and as quickly as possible, those practical solutions have to be implemented at the same time. Of course, the fossil burning is one key element. We can argue about the meat industry and how much that, and I know we like to cover that and ignore it, but methane gas is a big problem. So that is a big, as you're all aware, a big emitter of CO2, of greenhouse gas. So, this is an issue that's very important, and clearly it's something that we need to save, we need to carry out. So it's all become vegans.
Thank you.
Yes,
Thank you very
yes.
much. Thank you very much. Anybody else wants to comment on it, or we want to next?
Yeah, since you mentioned methane, I did want to maybe bring your point a little bit broader to say that there are solutions that are good to implement regardless of whether we complete this transition, which of course we need to. But in the meantime, we can still prevent energy and water leaks, and methane leaks are actually a huge source of global pollution emissions. So yes, think about those solutions that are kind of no-brainers, that we should be doing them regardless, and don't stop yourself from thinking big, because that's what we need to fix this crisis, is thinking big.
And plant trees. We have another question on here? Yes, ma'am.
Hi, good morning. I'm Michelle. I'm a CHCI Health Fellow. I'm from Ecuador, and I know that there's a lot of indigenous communities that are leading environmental efforts in the Amazon. So I'm wondering if any of your organizations work with international groups or indigenous groups just to lead the environmental justice efforts.
So yes, NRDC does have, we have teams in China as well as India, and we do work with several organizations throughout the Americas on climate priorities. I can't tell you the names of them right now, I'm sorry, but yes, we do some international work and with tribal communities as well. We have a whole working group that does an extensive amount of work with tribal communities in the US as well as some in Canada and perhaps some in the Americas, in the rest of the Americas.
Carolina?
Hi, hola. Yes, in Ecomadres, as part of Moms Cleaner Force and as part of the Environmental Fund, I didn't have the chance to talk about our approach of environmental justice, but within our program, we incorporated indigenous communities. And Ecomadres serving the Latino communities, but also we assisted the indigenous communities and also Black communities. So we actually have a colleague in Colorado that she acts for Ecomadres, but also for indigenous communities. And actually, she has been a lead on helping of regulating a law for oil and gas. So we can talk later on, but what we do work with the indigenous communities. And as a Latino, we also have that background in heritage. So that's an organic combination that we as Latino, we work closely with these communities. So.
And thank you for that question. Corazon Latino, we also do some work, especially in Amazonia. And there's a lot that, just piggybacking on your question, is really about this new trend of honoring and seeking guidance of the wise keepers of the forest. They know how to do it.
Yeah.
They know how to they have protecting our forests, protecting the lungs of our planet for centuries, for generations. So I think this is very important, and it's a moment, it's not just like, oh, let's bring them to a climate as a stakeholder. No, let's listen to them. Let's follow their lead, because that's what's ultimately going to help us. I mean, as part of the bigger solution is really bringing every voice, and we can talk offline, but it's definitely important to follow their leadership and their wisdom, because it is. So we have a few minutes to go, so I want to ask.
Another question.
Yes. One more question. Okay, I'm getting the green light from Dennis. If I get in trouble, it's his fault. Last question, please.
Thank you. My name is Isabella Paz. I'm a CHCI Nutritional Health Graduate Fellow, and I was just wondering if any of you could speak about how the agricultural industry plays or has a role in climate crisis, because I think it's North Carolina has more pigs than people, and these farms are centered or clustered around communities of color. So I was wondering if any of you could speak about that.
Sure. Want to take it?
Yeah, the climate crisis affects those communities in both causes and in impacts. So in causes, as we've talked about, methane emissions from livestock production are a big contributor to the greenhouse gases that cause climate change. And they also contribute to the increasing destruction of our nature and natural resources, as I've talked about. They tend to pollute the waterways around them, which flows downstream into our oceans. 80% of farm workers are Latino, and they are breathing in the pesticides that are sprayed out every day. And in terms of impacts, as we talked about, natural resource laborers who work all day out in the sun are much more vulnerable to extreme heat and wildfire smoke than those of us who have the luxury of being indoors with air conditioning. So yes, I would say agriculture is another one of those sectors that we really need to think through when it comes to a climate and health transition for our communities.
And we'll probably need a whole session about it. So let's get a final, just because we're on time, final message, Carolina, and everybody will have that final. You want to just respond and your final call to action message, anything that you missed.
I want to do the IRID, to answer to your question, currently, as part of our Ecomadres work and research, is to find that correlation that extreme heat is affecting the people. And as it was mentioned multiple times, Latinos are a lot in the outdoors, and that includes the agricultural workers. So we're doing a research, and we have partnered with the Union of Concerned Scientists to do a research about how the communities that are impacted by this extreme heat, which include the agricultural people, could do something. And we are going to have dialogues about that and fact sheets about this issue, because we have to bring this to our local, federal, and national, so they can do policies. There is actually one policy that it is pending to be approved, which is related to extreme heat, because we wanted to be part of this, learned what is the situation that is happening in a particular community, because it's not the same issue that happened in Florida, that they have hurricanes or floods, that is happening in Nevada, New Mexico. So what we wanted to learn is what the communities in our nation has been experiencing impacted by climate change, so we can address that topic with dialogues. So that's what I was saying, one of the areas that we identified that is an issue that we have to do more research, because there is some data available, and as part of this research, we identified that there are maternal health that is being affected, because there are people that are women that are in the outdoors, and actually we are going to do also some more digging on this and how we can help elected officials to formulate policies or to tailor policies that are already there so we can make some type of changes or infrastructure investment that we can provide to our communities for solutions that can improve their livelihoods. So I just want to say, like, I believe that available our information, but also as part of EDF and as part of Felipe, we have another initiative which is Cultivando Verde.
Viviendo Verde.
Viviendo Verde. I don't know why I said Cultivando. Okay.
We're cultivating
Viviendo
green
Verde.
people.
Yes. Viviendo Verde. So it provide also informations about what is the impacts of climate change and is in the language that people can understand and can take action.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like
Viviendoverde.net, viviendoverde.net. So Spanish language resources for our communities, EDF, Climate Power, and Corazon Latino. Angela.
Sure. In closing, I would say, you know, what we all discussed today, what was very prominent is the fact that we still are waiting on our federal government to finish the work that's necessary to pass a climate bill, to get the funding, the resources out to our communities and get to work in improving our infrastructure and our health outcomes. But also wanted to leave with you this, you know, yes, there are challenges to implementing adaptation measures, but that should not dissuade us. I would encourage you to think about what adaptation measures you can support, help implement in your communities and your states, because that's really where we're at. We need to be thinking more about adaptation. So don't be discouraged on that. And the last thing I would say is that, you know, many people ask me, so how do you get into an environmental organization? So I have no background in environmental work. I have a background in supporting the Latino community. And wherever I go, whether it's working for a nonprofit focused on, you know, Latino policy or working in environmental organizations such as NRDC, my focus is always on looking at the Latino community. If you're in the health sector, if you are in the legal work, wherever you are, you can be an environmentalist. You can support this type of work. So I would just encourage you to just be creative in how you think about this through whatever it is that you choose to do as your profession going forward.
Thank you, Angela. Shawna, last but not least,
Yeah, just to
you have
build
the
on
final
what
word.
you said, we have so much collective leadership just here in this room and amongst your network and your partners and your friends. And we talked about the importance of voting, but you can be an advocate throughout the year. You can talk to your elected officials, not just your congressperson, but also your local city council and see if we can plant some trees in your neighborhood. And we actually printed out toolkits, which you can find in the back, with policy recommendations for Congress, but also for anyone who's interested in these issues to find out what you can do, and also just a lot more about what we've been talking about how all these issues impact Latino communities and our health and jobs and cultural heritage and education and housing and every single aspect of life. There's a lot more to be talked about, but if you want a written resource, like, please read our guides and make use of them.
And join Latino Conservation Week.
Yes. LatinoConservationWeek.com coming up in July. Let's get our communities outdoors and enjoying what we have.
Great. Well, thank you very much. As a last thought, I want to challenge you guys. I want to challenge you to take care of yourselves, take care of nature, but spend 20 minutes. Research shows that if you spend 20 minutes a day in nature, you will have the benefits from immunological, you will have relaxation. There's a lot of benefits in just 20 minutes. If you can tell me that you cannot spend 20 minutes in nature, you're probably lying. So spend 20 minutes in nature. Encourage others to do it. And that is the most simple, the most revolutionary way to do it. Nature is the big equalizer. So I would encourage you to do that. Take care of yourself. And remember, as long as we take care of our Madre Tierra is going to take care of us. Thank you very much, Dennis. I did on time. Great. Thank you very much.